Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll just stop sharing. Thank you.
Mm.
Okay, Ruta, I think
Okay.
continue.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Extragalactic Astronomy 3 session at ASI. In this session, we will be having 5 talks, of which the first talk will be of 30 minutes duration and the remaining will be 15 minutes. So I would like to start by inviting Roopjyoti Gogoi to present their talk.
Thank you, Ruta. I'm sharing my screen. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, and I hope the sound is clear.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, okay. So thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present this talk in ASI 2021. Today, I will be talking about our efforts towards deciphering the role of dust in galaxies. I work at Tezpur University, and these are my collaborators who are mainly from Ayuka and RRI, and these are my PhD students. Gautam's PhD thesis was mainly focused on dust. Then he did his postdoc at IISc, and currently he is a faculty in Assam. Ranjupriya will be moving soon to South Africa for her postdoc, and others are my current PhD and master students, some of whom are also involved in this project. Well, so first of all, I will try to convey you the importance of understanding the effects of the presence of dust in galaxies if we are interested in any facet of astronomy. So this statement in itself conveys the importance of dust. It reprocesses nearly half of the total light emitted by stars in galaxies. So stars emit mainly from ultraviolet to near infrared, as we all know. These photons interact with the dust, they are absorbed, they are scattered, and dust then re-emit light in the far infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we can see that in this plot, this region is totally dominated by dust. I can mention here that our Milky Way would have been probably doubly bright in optical if dust were not present there. So in this process, it is very important to know how this light is reprocessed, how much and to what extent the light will be reprocessed depends on size, geometry, distribution, and density of the dust which is there in the galaxy. For example, we can see a plot here where we see spectrum of various galaxies like elliptical, disk, starburst, and ULIRGs. So we can see that in elliptical, there is very less star formation, and hence we can see less light emitted in the infrared region. Whereas in case of starburst, lot of star formation and hence enormous amount of light is emitted in the far infrared. So even if we consider similar amount of dust in all these galaxies, which is actually not true, then the amount of light emitted in FIR, that is far infrared, will depend on the star formation rate. Well, it is very interesting to know that even though dust has such huge effect on stellar light of galaxy, it constitutes a very minuscule fraction of the total galaxy mass. So here we see these two tables. These two tables are for Milky Way type of galaxies. So 1/6 of the total galaxy mass is actually baryonic, and out of which 1/6 is the ISM, that means the interstellar medium. And out of the 1/6 is baryonic, and 1/6 of baryonic is the interstellar medium. And in the interstellar medium, 99% is gas, and just 1% is dust. So this is just a tiny fraction in our galaxy, in any galaxy. Well, so the range of dust grain size is from 0.01 to 1 micron. It is about 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the kind of dust that we see on our furniture, which of course we do not appreciate at our homes. So they are mainly composed of carbon and silicates. The two main classes are PAHs, which is abbreviation for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and other large grains, which we call as very large grain or PHCs. So these pH molecules, they are basically rings of hydrogen and carbon atoms. They mainly emit from 3 to 100 micron, and larger the grain, they can emit more. So overall, the emission lies from to 1000 micron, which mainly lies in the far infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum. So the relative amount of warm and cool dust also varies inside a galaxy. Dust is mainly formed when we have chemically enriched cool and dense medium. So there are actually various mechanisms through which dust is understood to be formed, transformed, and destroyed inside a galaxy. Dust is mainly expected to form during asymptotic giant branch phase of stars, but recent evidence is that they could also form around supernova. It is still a mystery how they survived the shock wave involved in the supernova. It has also been proposed that dust might be forming around supermassive black holes. So if the dust grains are not scattered by UV rays, then they are consumed into forming newer stars, being part of giant molecular clouds. And these grains play a critical role in cooling and coagulation of giant molecular clouds. So as you can see that this dust grain, it absorbs the UV radiation, which could have harmed the hydrogen molecule. So it saves the hydrogen molecule from UV radiation. The molecule forms on the surface of the grain, and we can see that the grain re-emits in the infrared, and that energy goes out of the cloud. The cloud becomes cooler, and that helps in its gravitational collapse. So the presence of dust plays a crucial role in formation of stars. Now, because dust is involved in almost all processes that are involved in mass buildup of galaxies, they are correlated with nearly all galaxy properties. For example, the dust to gas ratio is correlated with the metallicity of galaxies. So dust mass has been found to be correlated with stellar, atomic, and molecular gas content of galaxies. Also, the amount of dust will be dependent on what has been the star formation history of that particular galaxy. That is, what is its present star formation rate and what has been the dominant mode of star formation in that particular galaxy. Well, so a dust attenuation curve gives the attenuation at each and every wavelength. It describes how a galaxy's stellar light is affected by dust at different wavelengths. It will be very high in far UV and will become negligible by the time it reaches the infrared portion of the spectrum. Now, how the attenuation curve will behave for a particular galaxy will depend on the properties of dust grain. The slope of the attenuation curve will depend on the dust content, the orientation, and also on the complex stardust symmetries. So, if we do not know the dust attenuation curve of a galaxy, then we would not be able to differentiate between a dusty galaxy with young stellar population and a non-dusty galaxy with old stellar population, as we can see in this figure. So, it is very important to account for the effects of dust to obtain intrinsic galaxy properties. As for example, we see a number of galaxies with dust land, dust ring. Although we can see these kind of features for very nearby galaxies, it is not possible to do that even if we go slightly further in the redshift. So, the accuracy with which we will be able to determine the attenuation curve of a galaxy is an important concern in astronomy. Well, since this question has been very critical to answer, there has been many technological advancement in this direction. As for example, there is a software called SIGAL. It is a code that performs SED fittings to determine physical properties of galaxies such as stellar mass, star formation rate, but most importantly, the dust attenuation curve. Well, over the years, many methods have been developed to measure the dust attenuation. However, model-based method is gaining more and more acceptance, and in this model-based methods, the basic idea is to obtain the best mass SED based on tens and thousands of SEDs created according to different model parameters. So earlier, only ultraviolet and optical emission were used for SED fittings, but that led to considerable degeneracy between resultant model parameters. Now, since IR measurements are available for more and more galaxies at higher redshifts, IR luminosity is also given as input in the SED fitting. So what happens is that this allows the dust attenuation parameters to be fitted freely, thus leading to a more detailed dust attenuation curve and more accurate stellar parameters. But as I have mentioned, and important requirement for this code is measurement of galaxy luminosity in the infrared, and especially the far infrared region of the spectrum. This advancement has actually happened over the last decade with advancement in space telescopes, which are observing in higher wavelengths. So latest in the series is Herschel. It observed from 2009 to 13. It has a pretty good sensitivity and observed in the range where dust peaks. So in this figure, we can see this is the range where this Herschel operates, and this is the range where the cosmic dust has peak. Well, now let me come to our own work. Our sample is Stripe 82. That has been the focus of many deep multi-wavelength photometric and spectroscopic surveys. It's a 220 square degree pads. So it has been observed by Herschel and also by SDSS with increased exposure time. So for this stripe, we have 2 orders of magnitude deeper photometric images. We have images in J and KS filters. It has been covered by GALEX and WISE, which are all sky surveys. So we have multi-wavelength data, as I have mentioned. Well, the motivation for the creation of such patches in the sky is to obtain a comprehensive understanding of the correlated and non-correlated properties of a galaxy. So in terms of dust, we can now examine the dependence of dust to gas mass ratio of a galaxy on the frequency of bars, spiral arms, pulse dominance, disk dominance, etc. So there are some 16,000 galaxies in this tribe with accurate structural stellar dynamical parameters along with dust neutral gas content and molecular gas content. But the structural parameters are optical. So it is critical to obtain the structural parameters in the infrared because it is an unbiased ratio of stellar mass distribution. Because in optical, presence of dust can lead to inaccurate measurements. Well, it is now getting clearer that galaxies with different morphologic types have witnessed characteristically different evolutionary path. For example, elliptical are now understood to have formed mainly during mergers, and these galaxies might have formed later mainly through accretion, minor merger, and maybe secular evolution. If we are able to quantify the differences in their attenuation curve, then we can obtain more insight into the dominant physical processes. We have a statistically large sample of 16,000 local galaxies, and the redshift is less than 0.3. So all these galaxies are in the stripe 82 area with J and K S band images, and here are some of the galaxies from our sample. Well, before we proceed to the decomposition of these images, there are a large number of steps that have to be taken to achieve robust measurement. For example, here you can see we have created masks for each and every galaxy cutout. So these are the galaxies and these are the masks. You can see that the neighboring galaxies are masked, but not the central sources. Well, so say for this galaxy, this is the mask, for this one, this is the mask, and so on. And this has been achieved in an automated mode using source extractor, IRAF, and self-written codes. So we are systematically going towards characterizing each and every galaxy through multi-component two-dimension decomposition. Let us now give you a brief glimpse of our fitting procedure. So here in the first column, you can see the galaxies which were observed on KSMAT. In the second column, we see the model for the corresponding galaxy that has been generated with iterations. The third column shows residual. So this residual is obtained by subtracting the model from the original image. In the fourth column, we see the model-like profile, which is compared with the original light profile to further check the accuracy of the fitting process. And talking about this lower panel, you can see the residual of the two profiles. So these are multiple, so there are multiple ways with which we try to obtain the most reliable structural parameters of a galaxy. So these are similar samples. The same method we have followed for all these galaxies. And we will be carrying out this process for thousands of galaxies through automation intervened by individual attention. Now, let me just summarize our motivations and objectives. So dust plays an important role in all formatory and evolutionary processes of galaxies. Accounting for its presence is critical to compute not just to the accurate star formation rate of the galaxy, but also for various other physical properties. Because the build-up processes are similar, the dust mass is correlated with neutral molecular gas mass and metallicity in galaxies, as I have already mentioned in my slides. So it is dependent on the star formation history that the galaxy has witnessed and the dominant stellar formation mode with which it has formed most of its stars. Well, so to obtain more clarity of its role, we are computing detailed multi-component 1D and 2D structural parameters of a statistically large sample of local galaxies in the infrared band of the spectrum. We will compute all kinds of structural measures to obtain very comprehensive picture of the morphology. Well, with detailed structural parameters, we hope that we will be able to examine the variation in dust properties for different submorphological classes. So this should lead to a clearer picture regarding the dominant formation mechanism of dust inside a galaxy and its full cycle, including the inflows and outflows seen by the galaxy. Note that because high resolution multi-wavelength data is already available, these galaxies have accurate redshift, stellar, gas, and dust parameters. Thus, we will give a detailed comparison of dusty and non-dusty galaxies. And we really hope that this will set a local benchmark relation and will act as a crucial resource for future studies. So this is what I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you. So this is my university, few glimpses of my campus. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And we can take questions. So whoever would like to ask question can raise hand. If we can wait for if there are some questions. In the meantime, I can ask. Yeah, there is one by Indulekha. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, could you please comment on dust content for dwarf galaxies a bit? Expand on it.
Can you please repeat the dust content of
Dwarf galaxies?
Dwarf galaxies.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, what type of dust grains are there like that?
Or do you expect any differences? Like, for example, the potential well is quite shallow, so the more powerful supernova explosions, likely the material can go out of the galaxy. Do you expect any differences in composition, for example?
I mean, there should be for that we need to see the wavelength at different bands. As for example, if we observe, if I talk about Spitzer, if we observe 8 and 24, then 8 tells us about PHs and 24 tells us about PSCs, then I think we need to see the different things, UVIR relations. From that, we can talk about the composition of the dust grains in that particular galaxy. So, is that what you are asking, or?
Yeah, you have this dust to gas conversion factor. All sorts of things are figured out using, I don't know, mostly Milky Way galaxy observations, I suppose, on detailed grain composition. So that is why I asked.
True. Yeah, so there should be some difference, of course, even if we talk about this bump, then it is different in different galaxies. Like it differs from Milky Way. Then if we go to our nearby galaxies, LMC, SMC, then it's quite different. Then of course there will be some difference. I cannot. I don't know, but of course there will be some sort of difference, and we need to fit models. Like there are various dust rain models proposed by Drain and Lee. We need to use all those models, and we need to match that to observations. Then we can conclude about the composition. About the characteristics and abundance of some particular grains. I think so.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, we have another next question. Yogesh Vardekar.
Thank you. First of all, an excellent talk and very, very good work and very clearly presented. My question is,
thank you so much.
You have done a lot of work on a fairly large sample of galaxies, wherein you already have all these dust properties and star formation rates and things like that. And you also are doing this bulge disk decomposition in a very systematic way. So I wanted to know, do you know what fraction of your galaxies have integral field spectroscopy? Because from surveys such as MANGA and so on, because if they do, then that will help complete the picture. You will be able to study the kinematics of the gas and the stars and so on, correlate it with the bulge and disk properties that you're getting from the decomposition, and also study compare the star formation properties that you get from the optical data with these sort of broader band SIGAL type stellar population synthesis models.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
This is a sample that basically the science can be much broader than what you're doing. What you're doing
of course, yeah.
is good and important. But I just wanted to say that you could do many more things if you have some kinematic data.
Yeah, thank you so much for the suggestion. We have just started the work. I will keep that into mind. Thank you so much for your suggestion.
Yeah, we can take one more question with Chanda Zog. Please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that it was a really wonderful talk. As Yogesh said, you are doing very nice work.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one thing. You said you have data for a large number of, you have structural decomposition for a large number of galaxies now, and you wanted to correlate with the dust properties. So how will you be obtaining these dust properties? Or which properties will you be comparing as a galaxy type?
Actually, like as I have mentioned, we have this parametric and non-parametric data. There were some whole case survey. The other members are working on this. So I think from that we know many these things. And first of all, we will see the morphology, but just knowing the morphology is not sufficient if we don't know, how much dust is there and all. First of all, we will just go through the morphology, and that's why we have chosen this case band, and then we will see the parameters. But
no, I meant
long way, I guess.
Yeah, no, I understand, but will you be comparing, say, the temperature of the dust or the grain size, or which property would you be focusing on?
Yeah. So, we will try to understand the characteristics of the dust grains, like what kind of dust grains are there? Is it pHs, or is it something else? So, like that, we will try to understand the abundance of that particular dust grain in that particular galaxy or in that particular region. And for that, we will be using different dust grain models.
Okay.
That is just a plan.
Yeah,
I don't know
okay.
whether it will
Yeah,
or not.
it's Good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because sometimes back we did it for Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So I don't see any new hands up for questions, and I sort of got my answer in the discussion. So we can thank Rupjyoti Gogoi again, and we can go to the next talk. Thank you, Rupjyoti.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
So Abhinaya OO will give the next talk.
Yeah, so a very good evening to one and all present here. I'm Abhinaya, currently working as a research assistant with Dr. Smita Subramanian. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the ASI meeting for giving me this opportunity to present my work on the Gaia view of a stellar substructure in front of the Small Magellanic Cloud. I'd also like to thank my guide and our collaborators for giving suggestive inputs and support throughout my work. So before going into my work, I'd like to give a brief introduction about the Magellanic System and its association with the Milky Way, and also the motivation behind our current work. So the image that is showing here is a combined optical and H1 map. The H1 data are mapped in pink and the optical data are shown in white. So LMC and SMC are the large and small Magellanic Cloud, which are situated at a distance of around 50 and 60 kiloparsec respectively from the Milky Way. So earlier, that is before the era of HST and Gaia, it was thought that these two clouds have completed multiple orbits around the Milky Way. And so the signatures of interaction like the leading arm and the Magellanic strip has been attributed to the influence of Milky Way on these clouds. But based on the revised proper motion estimates from HST and Gaia, simulations suggest that these clouds are either on their very first passage around the Milky Way or their orbital period is very long. Hence, the leading arm of the Magellanic stream were formed because of the mutual interaction between these two clouds. The simulations also suggest that the Magellanic stream has been formed approximately 1.5 gigayear ago, and the Magellanic bridge, which is a form of dust and gas in between the LMC and SMC, is formed approximately 100 to 300 million years ago in a recent tidal interaction between these clouds. But as you can see, the Magellanic stream and the leading arm are spread widely in the sky, approximately 100 degrees. So it is not trivial to identify the stellar counterparts to these gaseous features around the clouds. So these are the simulations from Besla et al. The top one shows the simulated particles of the gaseous features around the clouds. So you can see the gaseous features are more or less reproducing the observed features around the Milky Way. And the simulations also predict tidal stellar counterparts to these gaseous features, as it supports mostly to a tidal model. So as I already mentioned, it is not trivial to identify stars in these regions. Hence, many of the studies have concentrated on the slightly denser gaseous feature, that is the Magellanic Bridge. So these are some of the earlier studies which looked into the populations in the Magellanic Bridge. So studies like Demers and Battinelli and Harris 2007 have identified very young stars of the age of approximately 25 to 30 million years in the Magellanic Bridge region. These stars could have been formed from the gas strip from the SMC after the interaction, as they are very young. So later studies like Nidever et al. And Noel et al. Etc. has identified intermediate age or old stellar populations in the very central region and also in the western regions of the MB. But the origins to their stellar populations in each of the study differed. So a study by Belkrov et al. Has identified a bridge-like structure using the RL iris as traces, but a later study by Jasison has not identified any bridge-like structure of the RL iris stars, rather a smooth distribution. So no conclusive evidence about the nature of the interaction could be drawn uh, uh, on these studies. So as the SMC is approximately 10 times less massive than the LMC, it is obvious that the LMC has been, the stars from the LMC has been stripped out because of the gravitational pull of the LMC. So a study by Nidever et al. Used the RC traces and found dual RC population in 4 distinct regions in the eastern regions of the SMC, which you can see here in the green circles here. And later Subramanian et al. Has used the VISTA survey of the Magellanic Clouds data, which is a homogeneous and continuous near-infrared survey. So they have used a data of up to 4 degree and found that the same dual RC population has been identified from approximately 2 to 4 degree in the eastern regions of the SMC. And a recent study by Tutton et al. Has used a complete set of the VMC data and also traced the same feature up to 4 degree. So because of the limited spatial coverage of these data, these studies could not find the physical connection of this foreground structure, which is in the form of a dual red clump population with the Magellanic Bridge. So as you all know, Gaia scans the entire sky. We have the data, photometric and astrometric data of the entire LMC and SMC. So this is the stellar density towards the Magellanic system of Gaia DR2 sources. So the central 4 degree circle marks a region covered in the earlier studies, and the black circle marks the 10 degree region around the SMC, which covers almost the entire small Magellanic Cloud and also a significant part of the Magellanic Bridge. So the earlier studies have identified the dual population in the eastern region, which is towards the Magellanic Bridge and the LMC. So our aim was to study the extent, properties, and the origin of this stellar substructure, which is the presence of a foreground red clump population in the small Magellanic Cloud, using the continuous and homogeneous data obtained from the Gaia data release 2. So that was the data obtained for about 22 months from July 2014 to May 2016. So in our study, we have used approximately 314 square degree data centered on the optical center of the small Magellanic Cloud. We have used both the photometric data in all the 3 bands and the astrometric data, which is a proper motion and array and deck in both direction for our study. So this left plot shows the stellar density of our selected RC stars after applying various cuts. So we wanted to analyze the red clump population in sub-region by region. So we have divided the entire 10 degree into 0.5 degree annulus, and then later divided each annulus into 4 sectors, namely northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. So a typical subregion will look like this. So we have used red clump stars as a tracer. So why red clump stars? They are low mass stars in their core helium burning stage. So they have an age range of 2 to 9 gigayear. So as we expect the impact of the tidal interaction to be imprinted on the intermediate or old age population. This is one of the best candidate to look for. And as they all start their core helium burning stage at an almost fixed core mass, they have same absolute magnitude. And so if you look at the color magnitude diagrams of the nearby galaxies, they occupy a very compact region, as you can see here. So and so they are used as a standard candles. So we use the extinction map from Ribble et al. To correct for the extinction for all the sources, and then we plotted the color magnitude diagrams of each of the subregion. So this is in the regions between 2.5 degree to approximately 4.5 degree in the eastern subregions, we have identified a slight extension in the red clump population, as you can see here. So we have selected those region visually, and then we plotted the magnitude distribution and fitted them with the Gaussian to obtain the peak and the dispersion values. So in the regions where we have identified dual population, we have fitted with double Gaussian to account for the bright and faint population. So you can see that the selection also includes a red giant population, to which we have used a quadratic polynomial to account for it. So these plot shows the magnitude as a function of radius for the eastern subregion and for the western subregion. So in this plot, if you see at the 2.5 to 4.5 degree, we have a distinct dual population of RC stars. The dispersion values also does not overlap. And if we see the northeast values, that is the blue points, beyond 5 degree, they are similar to the main body population. And if you look at the southeast values, they are similar to the foreground population. So we found a typical difference of about 0.45 magnitude in G band. This will corresponds to a distance difference of approximately 12 kiloparsec. Since the RC stars are standard candles, the natural explanation for this difference is the distance effect. If you look at the western subregions, we have not identified any distinct population. So we have converted the magnitudes into distance by using the equations provided by Ruiz-Dunn et al. And plotted the distance of RC stars as a function of radius in all the 4 subregions, or the 4 sectors. So if you see the northeast and southeast subregions, there are 2 distinct populations where the main body is shown in green and the foreground population is shown in cyan. And if you look at the southeast, till approximately to 6 degree, we have a bright population. So as from our photometric study, we found that the dual RC populations are because of the distance separation between them. We also wanted to analyze the kinematics of these 2 spatially distinct populations. So since our initial selection included the contribution from RGB stars, we redefined our selection criteria based on the best fitting peak and dispersion values, and selected the bright and the faint RC stars for the proportion analysis. So we have calculated the mean proportion for the faint and bright RC, for the faint and bright RC stars in each of the subregion, and plotted them here along with the standard errors as the error bars. So you can see that the faint star and the bright stars are clumped together, and there is a clear separation between them. So this green point and cyan point marks the mean of all these bright and faint stars. So here you can see that they are very well separated in the proper motion plane, and you can see the bright RC stars have a larger proper motion, which also supports our interpretation that they are at 2 different distances. At the bright population is at a closer distance. So we found a difference of approximately 0.19 millisecond per year in right ascension and 0.12 millisecond in the declination direction. Since we have estimated both the proper motions and the distances for these RC stars, we have converted them into tangential velocities and the velocity components, and calculated them. So in this velocity plane, if you see the bright RC and the faint RC are clearly separated, and the tangential velocity difference between these 2 populations is approximately 35 kilometers per second, in which the foreground population is moving 35 kilometers per second slower with respect to the main body in the north west direction. So we also wanted to analyze
you have
yes.
2 more minutes.
Yes, ma'am, I'll come. So to understand the origin of this substructure. So we have compared our values with the simulation from Dias and Becky, in which they have modeled the SMC as a multi-component system with a central spheroid having stars and a disk having both stars and gas. So we have overplotted our proper motion values as a function of distance here, and the gray values marks the simulated particles. So as you can see from here, the values mostly match with the disk particle in the region where we have identified dual population. This is the case for the velocity also. It matches with the disk rather than the spheroidal component. So this shows that the RC stars which form the foreground population have been stripped from the inner disk of the SMC. So it is equally important to study the or to look for the tidal structure in another intermediate or old population. So a spectroscopic study by Dobby et al. Has identified a bimodality in radial velocities. So we wanted to analyze the that bimodality in radial velocity and the bimodality we saw in the distance of RC stars. So master students Disna James and Adya Mere are currently working on this. So I'd like to show the results from it. As you can see, the northeastern region greater than 2.5, we have bimodality in the radial velocity. So based on these two, we selected the stars for proper motion calculation, and as you can see, they are also separated in the proper motion plane. So for comparison, we have overplotted the foreground and main body population from our RC analysis, and we found yes ma'am, just a minute. Yeah, so the difference were comparable, and with this distance difference in the RC stars and the proper motion difference in RGB stars, we calculated the time of interaction, which was turned out to be approximately 355 million years. So this compares with the estimation of the simulation. So I leave the summary here. So a detailed chemical and 3D kinematic stars will help us to understand this interaction in a more detailed manner. Thank you all for your kind attention.
We can take one quick question if there is. Please raise your hand in case you have a question. Yeah, Chanda, Joe, please go ahead.
Yes, it's a very interesting work.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, it seems like you have bimodal distribution, but there are no stars lying in between the two peaks. So does it look like a clean separation between these two groups of stars? You know, that can tell you something about the way this separation occurred.
Yeah, so we have actually in the eastern regions, mostly the two peaks are well separated.
Okay.
Like the foreground and the main body peak, if you see at the magnetic distribution of all the dual distinct population, they are actually well separated.
Okay. So actually, it's such a nice piece of work. I think now the simulators should look at this data and try to model their simulations accordingly.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So, any remaining questions? One can take it up on Slack, as everyone by now is familiar. So, thank you, Abhinaya.
Yeah.
We will move to the next talk, which is by Shorodip Bhattacharya. So, I request him to share his screen.
You can see my screen, yes, and hear
Yes.
me. Okay, all right, so I'll just begin. So hi, I'm Shorodip. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at IUCAA. This work was done during mostly my PhD, and I worked with these people. So the work is the recent formation history of Andromeda as revealed from planetary nebulae. So the question is, why did we bother? So galaxies evolved by hierarchical assembly. They at high redshift, you can see them interacting. over time, over cosmic time, you can see different kinds of interaction happening, and that shapes the morphologies and properties of the galaxies that we see today. But if you want to go the other way, if you want to look at what processes or what merger history a particular galaxy has experienced, that is, this galactic archaeology is only so far possible for the Milky Way properly. And that is because we are inside it, we have many tracers, and the Milky Way has had a quiet merger history until 10 billion years ago, when it had its last major merger. But the Milky Way is only one of many spiral galaxies. They have varying present-day properties, varying halo masses, varying disks, varying star formation histories. And this depends on how they were formed, how they were built up, how the masses were built up, how the merger histories of these galaxies happened. M31 is our nearest giant spiral galaxy. And roughly 10 years ago, with the PANDAS survey, which was about 400 square degrees, looking at overdensities in RGB stars, they found that a plethora of substructures are present at M31, pointing that M31 has had a turbulent recent merger history, sharp contrast to the Milky Way. But what is unclear is whether it was one satellite which merged into M31, whether it was many satellites, what were the masses of these satellites. Multiple models have been proposed. But what you need in order to actually separate between possibilities and know the timing and mass of the satellites is to look at uniform kinematic and chemical abundances. However, this is difficult because the M31 is large on the sky. So if you look at the moon, which just popped up in the corner, that image is more or less to scale. So you can see how big the problem is. If you want to use, if you want to get kinematic measurements, you have to look at either for individual stars, you can get their absorption line spectra, or you can get IFUs. IFUs, of course, are tiny compared to this field of view. And even there, it's absorption line spectra. So in order to get any kind of absorption line spectra, you would need an insane amount of time to cover this large field of view. Plus, the Milky Way halo has a gradient across M31, so you have to also get rid of the Milky Way halo stars. What we can do is we look at discrete tracers. So Planetary Nebulae are a discrete tracer. I'll tell you what they are first. So post-AGB phase of stellar evolution, a planetary nebula is a late stage of stellar evolution, and stars between 0.8 and 8 solar masses traditionally go through the planetary nebulae phase. So there is a hot central star surrounded by an expanding shell. That is what is typically modeled the planetary nebula, but in the Milky Way, you see various different kinds of PN shapes. But if you go to extragalactic planetary nebulae, this is an HST image in green, the central point. This is the planetary nebulae, and this is a 0.5 arc-second circle. So the HST, it basically shows that it's a point source. You don't see any morphology, you don't see any extension. This is what the spectra of a planetary nebulae looks like. So this bright 5007 line, this is, and there's also 4959 line. So if you make a narrow filter around this, and you have a broadband continuum filter, the planetary nebulae will be bright in the O3, but in the broadband continuum, it will be fainter. So that's how you detect planetary nebulae with a narrow band filter. The extinction can be determined if you have an H alpha and H beta lines measured in your spectra. Chemical abundance measurements are possible if you have a temperature sensitive line, and what we use, and you can use the O3 4363 line, which is the brightest temperature sensitive line. So once you have all of this, why you still use planetary nebulae is because they are discrete tracers of the stellar velocity field. So at any point of time in a galaxy, amongst the entire stellar population, some stars are undergoing the planetary nebulae phase. Those are bright, we can find them, we can measure their radial velocities and velocity dispersions. And what this does you is a natural random sampling of the velocity just from identifying the planetary nebulae. The same thing happens when you get their chemical abundances, though that's a bit more difficult because the temperature sensitive line is fainter. But if you do that, you can get the radial metallicity gazons. This is an example in M33, the disk of M33. So what do we do in this work? So we survey 54 square degree in M31. So this is the central disk, and you have some of the major substructures. In the background, you have the pandas image. And with MegaCam, we actually find around 5,000 planetary nebulae in this whole image. Majority of them are, of course, in the disk. 4,000 of these are new. Around 413 PN spectra, 92 of them are new, but this is a fairly large sample, which gives you the line of sight velocity. And this has been measured with hectospec, mostly in the disk. And in this paper, in this talk, I'll concentrate on the disk for now. So 161 planetary nebulae have oxygen abundances, and 114 have argon abundances, and I'll get to later why we use argon. So this is kind of the map where we have kinematics with extinction measurements. If you plot out the extinction measurements, you see two peaks. So planetary nebulae, which are highly extincted, these are so in the AGB phase, dust is produced. But the more massive the star, the more younger the star, the more dust it produces and retains in the PN phase. So extinction sample is expected to be younger, whereas the low extinction sample, which has less dust in the circumstellar envelope of the nebula, that is expected to be older. So with this expected, so we divide into this expected young and this expected old population. And when we plot out their kinematics, what we do is we take a galactocentric radii, plot it against the rotational velocity outside 14 kiloparsec. You see that the high extinction planetary nebulae shown in blue are close to the gas rotation, which is shown in black. In red, you have the low extinction planetary nebulae, which are lagging further behind the gas. The high extinction planetary nebulae are dynamically colder, whereas the low extinction planetary nebulae, which are older, are dynamically hotter. So we have a younger, colder thin disk and an older, hotter thick disk in M31. Now we can attach ages to these because there are photoionization models. So if you take an individual the spectrum of an individual planetary nebulae, you can get you can fit a model and estimate the effective temperature and luminosity of the central star. This is done for around 16 planetary nebulae. And if you color them by their extinction, the high and low extinction planetary nebulae, and compare them with stellar evolution tracks, you get that the high extinction planetary nebulae cluster around 2.5 billion years, whereas the low extinction planetary nebulae are around 4.5 billion years. So this allows us to plot out the age velocity dispersion relation. So in gray, you have the age velocity dispersion relation for the Milky Way. Basically, what you see is that if you plot it into different radial bins, the thick disk is much hotter than the Milky Way. The thin disk is slightly less hot. And if you get the measurements of main sequence stars present in 14 to 17 kpc bin, there were some super bright stars measured. Those are roughly similar to the Milky Way, so they have secular evolution. Between 14 and 17 kpc is where you will be seeing the sun if it were in M31, so we also plot that out. Now, this shape of the age velocity dispersion relation actually tells you about the merger history. So if there has been a minor merger, and this is from a model, if an n-body simulation actually, then you basically see that a minor merger has negligible effect on the age velocity dispersion relation. But if you have a 1:4 major merger or similar, if the merger ends here, all the stars which were present in the disk prior to the merger, they will be thrown up into the thick disk. The thin disk is going to be formed, the thin disk that we measure, the planetary nebulae high extinction, they are sort of in the thin disk in formation. And this is basically eventually about 2 billion years after the merger, 1 to 2 billion years, depending on the model, you will end up with a disk similar to secular evolution. So this basically tells us that a major merger happened between 2.5 and 4.5 billion years ago between these two regions. And if we take how thick the thick disk is, the velocity dispersion, we can make an estimate of what kind of masses were required to heat the galaxy to this value. And about 1:5, mass ratio of 1:5 is what you would get. So you would get a major formed the kinematically distinct thin and thick disks. We can also do chemistry of the planetary nebulae. So oxygen has long been used as a metallicity tracer in planetary nebulae, H2 regions, etc. But in the AGB phase, it may be modified. So this has been found in the Milky Way. And in this green band is where you expect there to be no modification. So if we find some planetary nebulae which have, so this is an argon to oxygen ratio. So if it's in this region, it is oxygen depleted. If it's in this region, it's oxygen enriched, and it covers the entire metallicity range more or less. So the only way you're going to get an accurate estimation of the ISM, the interstellar medium, measurement of the conditions of the metallicity at the birth of the planetary nebulae, that you can only get if you use argon. And if you use oxygen, you're going to get it's going to be skewed. So if we take the high and low oxygen, low extinction planetary nebulae and compare their distributions, we find the argon distributions. If you use an Anderson-Darling test, you find that these two distributions are different. They can't be drawn from the same population. This high extinction planetary nebulae have a slightly higher value of the extinction, mean value of the argon abundance, whereas the low extinction planetary nebulae are more metal poor. So what we have is chemically distinct thin and thick disks in M31. We have an younger, slightly more metal rich, low, dynamically colder thin disk, and an older, slightly less metal rich, dynamically hotter thick disk in M31. We can also plot out the radial abundance gradients with planetary nebulae. And you have the high extinction on top. This is we use the argon again, and we have the low extinction in the bottom. And we use the mean value so that you can the median value so that we can get rid of the scatter slightly. So what it shows is that the radial gradient value, it's similar to what you see in H2 regions in the lowest, and they will expect that for high extinction younger population. And there is this region where you see a dip in the high extinction. This is mainly because this is the region where the star formation ring occurs in M31, which is metal poor and collects a lot of the metal poor gas, we think. There is a dip in the high extinction as well, but we have no idea where that comes from. And we need more data is our answer, how to deal with this. But the important thing is that the low extinction PN are flat. The gradient is roughly flat. And in both these cases, the gradient is flatter than possible from secular evolution. So if you have a Milky Way-like thing, like galaxy with secular evolution of a long period of time, you would have a much steeper gradient, not just in the high and low extinction. This is consistent in, I have just one slide left. Consistent in principle with a major merger simulation, pending direct comparison. So this brings us to the summary. So we survey the largest sample of planetary nebulae in any galaxy. Oxygen isn't that great, use argon. We find the kinematically and chemically distinct thin and thick disks in M31 for the first time. We support a single merger, which happened 2.5 to 4.5 billion years ago. The merging galaxy was twice as massive as M33, which would have been the third largest member of the local group before being swallowed up by M31. We have further spectroscopic follow-up. We have doubled the sample, but we're still working on it. And we're also comparing with hydrodynamic simulations. And if you want to know more, you can read the papers. Thank you.
Thank you, Shorodip. We can take questions. Please raise your hand. Suchetana, please ask your question.
Yeah.
Suchetana Chatterjee.
So nice talk, Shorodip. Can you go to the slide where you were inferring that there has been a merger?
This one.
Yes, this one. So where did you, so the theoretical plot that you show, right?
Yeah.
You're saying that what kind of simulations are this?
So these are, so originally they took illustrious galaxies, then did zoom in simulations on, zoom in hydrodynamic simulations on illustrious galaxies.
So these are from Illustris.
These are
Now,
from Illustris, but zoom in. Yeah.
Yeah, zoomed in. Okay. So
Yeah.
I think my question is that when you find what we see in the left hand side of the plot is that you do see this change in the sigma, and what you are saying is you're connecting that with the scenario where you see this merger scenario from cosmological simulations. So my question is that the only possibility for which you can see such an observational feature, or there are other things that can also cause the same effect? Did my
So the
question
answer,
make sense?
yeah, but the answer is only any kind of large dynamical event can cause similar features. So no secular evolution scenario can cause this. So you need to have any large dynamical scenario, and the most common dynamical scenarios are mergers. Flybys, I don't think will work, and so it has to be a merger.
So then the claim is that you need a major dynamical thing to make that thing happen, to have the change in your.
Yes.
So then, okay, then I'll not ask if there are other questions. People can go ahead, but I had a part B to that question, so I can ask that later.
Okay.
Yeah, Sandeep. Sandeep?
Yeah. Hello, nice talk, Saurabh. Yeah, so Chetna asked, is there any other scenario for this sigma to increase? I think, in my knowledge, there's a buckling of bar, which also can result in increase in sigma z suddenly. If there's a bar, then if it goes buckling, then it suddenly increases the sigma z, which I have seen in my work. So I don't know, in this case, is it?
So there is a bar in M31, and there is a possibility that it has buckled, but it will not make the thick disk 3 times as thicker as the Milky Way. Just the value of the sheer value of sigma z, this is sigma rotation in the left actually. So sigma rotation around 100 kilometers per second, it's not possible from any secular, including buckling of the bar.
Okay, so is it in the very central region, or is it outside?
No, this is in the outer regions.
Okay,
but thick disk is roughly similar.
Okay, we'll discuss offline.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Suchetana. I think we will move the part B of your question to Slack, Suki, in the interest of time. Thank you, Shorodip, for the talk.
Thank you.
And we can go to the next talk, which is by Shairi Ansar. She had requested to screen her talk. So I will share my screen and show her talk. Sorry, I'm unable to share this screen. Any of the hosts, can they help with this?
You're unable to share the screen?
Yeah, I am clicking that option, but it doesn't show up anything. I don't know, something is not working like before.
Maybe a permission need to be given by the host.
No, she's a co-host already.
Yeah, sorry, earlier I could do it, but right now it is just not showing up anything.
Is Shayuri there? Maybe she...
Yeah, she is online. We also have her video.
Okay.
Can you share it, please?
I don't have it, but Shayuri, can you share it?
Yeah, Shayuri is also a co-host.
Yeah.
So,
I will just call her also. 1 minute.
Yeah, Abhirup, if you can share it, please go ahead. Or we could do the next talk first, and then if the speaker is available.
yeah, just a second, let me see.
Yeah, if the next speaker is available, maybe you can go ahead, maybe.
Yeah, Neeraj is.
Yeah, sorry for the hitch. I don't know, I don't see that option. So the next speaker is Neeraj Kumari. Are they available? Yeah.
Yes.
Could you please share your screen? We will go to Shayuri Answer's talk after this.
Neeraj, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Should I start?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am Neeraj Kumari from PRL. I would like to thank organizers for giving me this chance to present our work here. I am working under the guidance of Dr. Sachin Nayak. These are my collaborators. Today, I am going to present our work on UV optical and X-ray variabilities in Seyfert Galaxy Markarian 509. This is the overview of my talk. First, I'll briefly talk about AGNs, then motivation behind this work, then observations and data analysis part and results we have got. At last, I'll summarize my talk along with some conclusions. As we know, AGNs are the most luminous and persistent sources in the universe and emit a large amount of radiation in entire electromagnetic waveband. These are basically supermassive black holes located at the center of the galaxies and accrete mass from their surrounding medium.
Excuse me. I think your slides are not visible. Could you please share your screen again?
Okay. Oh, okay. Is it visible?
Yeah, you could make it full screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay. I'll start again. As we know, AGNs are the most luminous and persistent sources in the universe and emit enormous amount of radiation. They are supermassive black hole located at the center of the galaxy and accrete mass from their surrounding medium. They come in a variety of classes on the basis of radio emission. They are classified broadly in radio quiet and radio loud. And on the basis of viewing angle, in type 1, in which we directly observe the central engine, and type 2, in which our view is obscured by putative torus. Typical spectrum of radio quiet AGN consists of continuum, which we call power law. And apart from that, there are other spectral components such as soft axis below 2 keV, iron line near 6.4 keV, and hump-like structure above 10 keV. So one of the most important properties of AGN is variability. The origin of variability in multiple bands and correlation between them has been one of the most intriguing questions in the studies of physical size and structure of the AGNs. They show variability on different time scales. There are multiple proposed mechanisms for that. First and obvious one is the fluctuation in mass accretion rate. That is, the change in mass accretion would be reflected as a variation of flux. And this kind of variability is driven by viscous time scale, which is generally of the order of years. But short time scale variabilities are also found in these kind of AGNs. And those can be explained by next Comptonization process. So in this process, the seed photons from the disk are injected in the electron plasma, that is hot corona, and get inverse Comptonized and emit in X-rays. And any change in seed photons will affect the X-ray flux. And next is the X-ray reprocessing, in which coronal photons fall onto the disk and heat it. As a result, the temperature of the disk at a particular radius increases, and time lag observed between two wavelengths as a result of this process is given by light travel time and expressed by this formula. This source Markarian 509 is a bright Seyfert-1 galaxy and located at a low redshift, having SMBS mass of the order of 10 to the power 8 solar mass. This source is being monitored from Swift X-ray Observatory since 2006. There are 3 instruments on board Swift, BAT, XRT, and UVOT, and we have used the archival data from XRT and UVOT. For the data detection process, we followed the standard pipelines given by the instrument team. Now comes to the data analysis part. So first we fitted the average spectrum of all the observation ID with redshifted power law for the continuum and 2 blackbody components of temperature 120 electron volt and 460 electron volt for fitting soft axis. The low temperature blackbody is the component which comes from the standard accretion disk, and the second one with relatively high temperature could be an analogy to the structure given by Dunn et al. in their paper in 2012. In this structure, the warm componentizing plasma of temperature 0.2 to 0.5 kV is embedded inside the optically thin and hot componentizing plasma of around temperature 100 keV. We also fitted the individual IDs with simple redshifted power law and blackbody. In this case, there was no need of second blackbody component because of low statistics. We calculated the X-ray flux in different energy range from the fitting. From visual inspection itself, all the light curves seems to be correlated. And to quantify that, we calculated fractional RMS variability amplitude, which is given by this formula, and the uncertainty by this. From here, we observe that the variability decreases as we go from shorter wavelength to longer wavelength. This trend has been observed in many previous studies, as emission in longer wavelength is expected to originate from the regions in accretion disk at larger radii and prone to dilute with other effects like emission from BLR, NLR, or sometimes host galaxy. Interestingly, the hard X-ray shows very low variability. We also checked variations and correlations in different parameters and found that there was either very weak or no significant correlation at all between different spectral parameters. This correlation result and the low variability of hard X-ray band shows that suggests that the emitting region are likely distinct or partly interacting. We also employed a technique called count correlation with positive offset to find out the constant component in different energy bands. This approach was first used in black hole X-ray binary Cygnus X1 in its high soft state. Each pair of energy band is fitted with a straight line where the slope m represents how strongly two fluxes are dependent, and offset c tells us about the constant component. So we chose the hard X-ray and UVW2 as a reference band, and all the other bands as subsidiary. We also calculated the Pearson coefficients, and the value of Pearson coefficients estimated tells us that there is low but significant correlation between hard X-ray and all the UV optical bands, whereas the correlation among UV optical bands is very strong. So we estimated the time lag with respect to UVW2 band, which is the shortest wavelength in of UVOT telescope on board Swift. It is well established that long-term variation distort the short-term variations while calculating CCFs. Since we are interested in short-term variations, we filtered out the long-term variations using Loess method. And after filtering for different time scales, we used 3 methods for calculating time lag: ICCF, DCF, and Javelin method. The time lag calculated from these three methods were similar with an error. From this figure, we can see the effect of filtering where the CCFs were narrowed down after filtering. So we filtered out light curves for variations more than 10, 15, 18, 20 or 25 days. Here in this column, we have estimated lag without filtering, and as we can see, the excess lag in X-ray and U band, which has been reduced after filtering. Here we found a positive lags with respect to UVW, positive lags in X-rays with respect to UVW2 band even after filtering. So here we discard the possibility of X-ray reprocessing in which X-rays should lead the UV bands. Also, the zero lags among UV bands signifies that the UV emission is coming from the overlapping region. We have plotted lag spectrum, that is time lag versus wavelength plot without filtering and after 20 days filtering. We fitted these observed data points with simple power law given by this formula, whereas the alpha determines the radius of the accretion disk, which emits in UVW2 band. The theoretically estimated time lags for standard thin disk are shown in green bullets. In the left plot, excess in U band is explained by the diffused emission coming from the broadline regions, which has reduced after filtering, while X-ray doesn't fit to the data even after filtering and show extra lag here. So there is, to explain, there is one model given by Gardner and Dunn in 2017. And according to this model, the inner part of the accretion disk, which is called Comptonization region, is puffed up and emits in EUV energy band. And this region is heated by the hard X-rays. Instead of directly falling onto the outer part, so these hard X-rays coming from the central corona producing heating waves which dissipate outwards. And in response to these heating waves, the outer region of the disk expands and contracts and produces extra lag in X-rays. But this model also doesn't explain the positive lag in X-rays, which is the case with Markarian 509. Also, the fitted values point of beta 0.099 and 3.6 without filtering and after filterings are not compatible with standard disk theory. So here we conclude that the actual disk is much more complex than our understanding of the accretion disk theory and likely to be puffy or inhomogeneous. Lastly, I'll summarize my talk. So the observed light curves in Markarian 509, light curves are in X-ray as well in UV opticals. Optical bands are highly variable and correlated. Interestingly, the X-ray power law continuum shows smaller variability amplitude as compared to other bands. And this indicates that the emitting region of X-rays and UV optical are distinct or partly interacting. And we found from the average spectral fitting a soft axis below 1 kV, which was fitted with 2 thermal components. And the time lag calculated with respect to UVW2 band increases with increasing wavelength. Although there was excess lag in U and X-ray band, U band is explained with the contribution of diffused emission from BLR, but this could not explain the excess in X-rays. So here we discard the possibility of reprocessing scenario because of the positive lag between UVW2 and X-ray bands. We also found the zero lags among the UVW means among UVW1 and UVM2 band after filtering, and this suggests that the emitting region in UV are overlapping. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj. Questions for Neeraj? Yeah, Ritabam. Please go ahead and ask. Ritabam Chatterjee.
Hi, Neeraj. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the excess variance that you showed was smaller in the hard X-rays, and then it was higher in the soft X-rays, and then increasingly smaller in other bands. So you commented on the hard X-ray. Is there any reason for the hard X-ray? Maybe so. Is that just the uncertainty in the X-ray hard X-ray light curve is too much, but excess variance is taking care of that? And also, you said that in the longer wavelength, it's getting smaller because of maybe host galaxy and so on. But do you have an estimate of how smaller it should get because of the host galaxy?
So generally, the contribution of host galaxy is less than 20%. So since we are looking for the short-term variations, so we can neglect the contribution of host galaxy on these time scales.
Yeah. So then I was asking that why is the excess variance becoming smaller at longer wavelengths?
Yeah, because excess variance is means decreasing because of this reason. In longer wavelength, emission from the longer wavelength is coming from the outer part of the disk, which is getting diluted and like some contribution is also coming from the BLR region, like in UV or optical bands. So, and if some emission is coming from the outer part, it will smooth down when coming to the inner part.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any other hand raised. So I think any remaining discussions can be moved to Slack. Thank you, Neeraj Kumari, for the talk. And we will have the last talk of this session by Shayuri Ansar. And I will share my screen too. Yeah, sorry, I think the hosts, one of them has to show this talk because I don't see anything happening with my share screen for some reason.
Yeah, let me try. Okay. Can you hear me, Ruta?
Yes.
Okay, let me see.
Other than the stellar disk and the H1 disk, a galaxy also contains dust as shown in the
Yeah,
image
please
of
make it full screen
NGC253.
and reset it to the.
These are the Baroni components of a galaxy.
I think the volume is a bit low, Ruta.
Gas.
Yeah, volume is low and it started playing from not from the beginning.
Okay.
Abhirup, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I'm just trying to.
Hello everyone, I'm Shayuri. I'll be talking about a pilot study.
It is still visible only on the part of the screen.
For the Galaxy UGC 5288 using simulations. This work has been About a pilot study to determine halo spin and
Yeah,
concentration
we can
for the
hear.
galaxy
The
UGC
volume can be
5288
increased a
using
bit.
simulations.
Yeah.
This work has been done under the supervision of Dr. Moshumi
Yeah,
Das
I
and
think
with my
also it should
collaborator
start from the
Dr. Sandeep
beginning.
Kumar
Yeah.
Kataria. Hello everyone, I am Shayari. I'll be talking about a pilot study to determine halo spin and concentration for the Galaxy UGC 5288 using simulations. This work has been done under the supervision of Dr. Moshumi Das and with my collaborator Dr. Sandeep Kumar Kataria. We know that there are various components of a galaxy. The image at the top left corner shows the stellar disk of NGC 6744 with a bulge or a bar at the center. The image at the center shows an example of an extended H1 disk galaxy. It shows the stellar disk compared to the H1 disk of NGC 628. Other than the stellar disk and the H1 disk, uh, a galaxy also contains dust as shown in the image of NGC 253. These are the baryonic components of a galaxy. The Chandra X-ray observations of hot gas in halos of galaxy clusters clearly shows the presence of dark matter halo which surrounds the gas which is in shock condition. The dark matter, as shown in the violet color, has been estimated through lensing studies. We want to understand the properties of the dark matter halo. This cartoon diagram shows the concept of dark matter, which encompasses a galaxy, which may be a disk containing a bulge. The galaxy sits at the center or the minimum of the potential well of the dark matter halo. The green curve shows the expected rotation velocity from the visible disk, but from observations of H121 centimeter, we get velocities which are much larger than the expected velocity. The rotation curve tells about the mass inside radius r, and it is useful for modeling mass profile of different components. Thus, the dynamical mass inside a radius r may be greater than the observed uh, stellar and the gas mass combined. The structural property of a dark matter halo can be expressed in terms of the concentration parameter C. Here I show two examples of a dark matter halo having different concentration. So a dark matter halo with more concentration will indicate more concentration of mass as at the center. Other than the structural property, the dynamical property of a dark matter halo can be expressed in terms of the spin of a dark matter halo. From tidal torque theory, halos gain initial spin or angular momentum due to gravitational tidal torques by neighboring dark matter distributions. In this regard, in 1969, Peebles defined a dimensionless angular momentum lambda, which is expressed through this expression. And later on, in Bullock et al. 2001, the same spin was re-expressed in terms of the virial mass, the virial velocity, and the virial radius of the dark matter, along with the angular momentum. This in the same paper, they estimated a distribution or a histogram for different dark matter halos from cosmological simulations, and here is the distribution along with the log normal plot. The mean of this distribution is about 0.3035 with a standard deviation of 0.5. So this has been estimated for cosmological models, but the same cannot be or has not been produced for galaxies from observations. So we motivate our work with a simple question: can we estimate the spin of dark matter halo for an observed galaxy? We develop a technique to estimate halo spin and concentration of an observed galaxy using maximum number of observed structural and dynamical parameters of the galaxy using simulations. We use the codes Galaxy and Gadget 2 in our work. The first step is sample selection. After selecting the model galaxy the galaxy from observations, we model it with a stellar disk, a gas disk, and a dark matter halo. As we are doing a pilot study, we consider two profiles, the Hornquist profiles and the pseudo-isothermal halo profile. We modify GAL-IC to include a gas disk profile and the pseudo-isothermal halo profile, which is not included in GAL-IC. We generate the initial conditions of the galaxy with the same properties as the observed galaxy. After this, we evolve our initial models to check for stability, and we estimate the concentration and spin of halo using rotation curve and bar properties. We also study the evolution of the halo spin distribution for both the profiles, and ultimately we ask the question, which model is better? Is it the Hornquist or is it the pseudo-isothermal halo? Coming to sample galaxy selection, we select a galaxy named UGC 5288. The criteria, some criteria we had to keep in mind. It should be isolated galaxy because we are not dealing with interacting systems. We avoided face-on systems because we want a very good rotation curve, and we avoided star forming galaxies because we are not considering star formation in our model. UGC 5288 is a dwarf galaxy with a central bar located at the Lynx Cancer void. It has an inclination of 38 degrees and a very extended H1 disk as shown in this plot, which shows the H1 contour superposed on the B band image of the galaxy. The star formation is limited to the central portion of the galaxy with no star formation in the H1 disk, and the central B band magnitude of this galaxy is 22 magnitude per arc second square, which tells that it is at the borderline of being an LSB galaxy. So we take all the properties available from observations to model, to create our initial galaxy models. Like these model parameters are the stellar mass, the gas mass, the virial mass of the dark matter halo, the surface densities of the stars and gas, the disk scale lengths, the extent of the H1 disk, and the flat rotation velocity. So with our initial models fixed and initial power parameters fixed, we evolve our model with Gadget 2, and the properties after 2 gigayear evolution is shown in these plots, and uh, this we see that the structural and dynamical properties are maintained. So with our stable models, we now move on to estimate the concentration of the dark matter halo. We have two types of profiles, that is the Hornquist profile and the pseudo-isothermal profile, and here we compare our evolved rotation curves with the observed rotation curve from Purapati et al. 2020. We from these two plots, it is evident that the pseudo-isothermal halo profile produces a rotation curve which has a better match with the observed rotation curve. For the Hornquist halo model, the model with C is equal to 8, concentration 8, has the least chi-square. And for a pseudo-isothermal model, the model with the concentration C ISO is equal to 447, or a core radius of about 0.23 kiloparsec has the least chi-square. And this value matches with the estimated core radius by Kurapati et al. 2020. With our concentration parameters fixed for our model, we move on to estimate the spin of the halo. So to estimate the spin of the halo, we use the bar properties, and to estimate the bar properties, we use the SDSS I-band image of UGC 5288. So this shows the image, and we fit ellipses on the bar. This is our ellipse model, and the residual shows that the fit is a good fit. We also plot the ellipticity versus the semi-major axis length and the position angle versus semi-major axis length. The yellow region indicates a region where in between the maximum ellipticity value and this green line, which indicates the semi-major axis length at which the position angle drastically changes from a value of about 73 degree to 54 degree. So these are the observed ellipticity and semi-major axis length, but we have to calculate or estimate the intrinsic values of these properties. So we consider projection effects and convert the values to the intrinsic values as shown by this figure. So with these values, we compare our models of our simulation. So for the Hornquist case, we already have models with C is equal to 8, which are shown in this plot with different spin values and different this scale heights. And here in this plot, we have our observed values lying in the range of shown in the yellow patch and the gray patch. We estimate the ellipticity for all of our models, and we find that the model with model 1 and model 4 has best match for the bar properties. And we also here notice that the ellipticity for model 1 is initially very high and decreases to a lower value, but for the model 4 the ellipticity is initially not very high, and it will never reach the very high value of ellipticity of from the observations compared to the observations. So we notice that model 1 is the best match, and it has a spin value of 0.078 at R200, the evolved spin value. So we do a similar analysis for the pseudo isothermal halo case, and we find again another model which with a concentration of C iso is equal to 447 shown in this plot, and the best match model has a spin value of 0.08 at R200, and this spin value is very much similar to the previous Hornquist halo case. So with these two best models, we study the evolution of the spin of the halo. This two figures shows the evolution of the spin from t is equal to 0 to 2 is equal to 2 gigayear. The spin distribution is very different for the above two models, even though the values match very closely at R200. The initial value of spin, which is this black curve in the figure, changes with evolution, and this is due to the redistribution of angular momentum and mass with evolution. So we can see that the spin distribution is very rich, and we should consider the spin distribution throughout the large radius range, rather than just taking a single spin value at the virial radius. So in summary, we estimate the concentration and spin of the halo using the H1 rotation curve and bar properties of UGC 5288 for two halo profiles, the Hornquist and pseudo isothermal. For Hornquist profile, the model with C is equal to 8 and spin 0.078 at R200 has good match, but in terms of rotation curve, the pseudo isothermal halo is a better halo model. For pseudo isothermal halo, the model with core radius 0.23 kiloparsec and spin of 0.08 has very good match with rotation curve and bar properties. The spin at R200 is slightly higher than the mean halo spin of galaxies, which is about 0.035, but LSB dwarfs are expected to have higher spin, and our results are hence in the right direction. This method can be applied to galaxies with low star formation rate only, as we have not included star formation in our models, but in future we will improve this technique by considering star formation. We will apply this technique on a large sample of observed galaxies and find out the parameter space and estimate the distribution of the spin. So these are my references. Thank you. Now I can take questions if there is any.
Thank you, Shoiri. We will take just one quick question. Shantanu Desai, please go ahead in the interest of time.
Yes, so since you have done a detailed dynamical modeling of this galaxy 5288, can you test if this galaxy shows evidence for radial acceleration relation with a very negligible intrinsic scatter?
Yeah, I can test. That will be possible.
So have you done that or?
No, till now we have not done that, but we can check. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So actually, in the interest of time and being there being a session starting right now, we will have to conclude this session. I would like to thank all the speakers and also the hosts for chipping in due to the technical hitch. Thank you for the participation and making this session very interesting. And see you at other sessions. And please continue on Slack. Thank you.
Hi.
I approve. Yeah.